Can y'all hear me? Okay. I'm Brianne Rosner. I'm the Executive Director of SNAG. I want to just thank Pat for being such an amazing support in setting the show up. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianne.
Yes. And for those of you not familiar with SNAG, we're an international nonprofit organization committed to advancing jewelry and metalsmithing by inspiring creativity, encouraging education, and fostering community. Founded in 1969 as the Society of North American Goldsmiths, the organization has evolved to include and promote diverse expressions of jewelry, adornment, body-related objects, sculpture, and installation. SNAG publishes Metalsmith Magazine, which we have some complimentary copies of here. We facilitate in-person and virtual conferences, events, and exhibitions, and we provide scholarships and educational advancement and more. Members of our inclusive community include professional artists, teachers, students, gallerists, collectors, curators, and writers. And we hope you will join SNAG. Membership includes a subscription to Metalsmiths, special discounts, exclusive opportunities, and other valuable benefits. So I hope you've all had a chance to see the exhibition, Scrumptious, Jewelry as Nourishment. It's an exhibition of work that plays on our craving for beauty, indulgence, and sustenance. Jewelry satiates a primal hunger, offering a dazzling treat for our eyes and recipe for sumptuous self-expression. The exhibition features jewelry that entices the viewer and seduces the wearer through a feast of decadent materials, delicious surfaces, and luscious, juicy color. So I'd like to thank the sponsor of this talk, the New Jewelry Guild of the Metal Museum, located in Memphis, Tennessee. The Metal Museum is the only institution of its kind in North America and is one of only a few in the world devoted exclusively to metalwork. Members of their jewelry guild will be able to actively engage with the museum's jewelry programming and collection, support fundraising initiatives, and participate in exclusive educational and social events. So if you're curious to learn more about that, go to their website. And I'd now like to introduce the jurors who selected the work that you see here. They'll share their take on the show and how their practice informed their decisions. So we have right here Edward Cabral, an artist and chef living in Brooklyn, New York. His research-based practice encompasses traditional sculpture, edible monuments, jewelry, performance, and temporary objects. He received his BA in Visual Critical Studies from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2011. He has exhibited at Williams College Museum of Art, Alexander Gray Associates, the Drawing Center, and Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts. He has appeared in Mold Magazine, Architectural Digest, and Cake Scene, as well as the History Channel, Disney Plus, and the Food Network. Biba Schutz is a studio jeweler based in New York City. Her studio practice is supported with addition and one-of-a-kind jewelry influenced by her surroundings and personal stories. Continuing her passion, she periodically takes time away from body adornment to make objects. Through the past 30 years, she has brought her voice to the SNAG community via galleries, invitation, and juried shows. Her jewelry is in private collections and public institutions. So welcome both of you. Thank you both. And I just want to say it's been fun. It's been a pleasure working with you. When we have them do the jury process, and then I kind of facilitate the final selections, and it's always so enjoyable to bring two people that have never met before in this very collaborative experience. And
we never met before either.
That's what I'm saying. Exactly. Yeah. So I love it. Do you all want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Yeah.
And talk a little bit about how your practice informed your decisions in the jury, or whatever you want to share.
Yeah, so my name is Edward. I'm a sculptor. Generally, I do a lot with food, around food history, sort of material history. I study visual critical studies, so that's like sort of like a art history and art theory and art practice. And so then a lot of my actual practice is sort of like kind of fusing together fine art and jewelry and cuisine and performance and sort of like finding new ways of making and sort of being a little bit irreverent, but also, you know, acknowledging sort of the long history we've inherited as makers and as chefs and as artists. I do a lot with food, and so I think it very clearly sort of informs then the choices I've made here and everything. And I'm known especially for like pastry, which of course then we'll talk more at length about that, but I feel like pastry itself has lots of connections with jewelry, this idea of like process orientation, materiality, craftsmanship sort of thing. So yeah.
I'm Biba Schutz, and I think most of the people here know a little bit about me as a jeweler. What was interesting about being invited to participate in this show is how important food is to me. And as some of you know, I was at the farmer's market this morning before I came here. I will go out of my way to find the ingredients that suit me. I'm very particular about it, and I cook mostly rather than eating out. For me, the pleasure of food, it used to be the pleasure of shopping for shoes. Well, I don't shop for shoes anymore, I shop for food, and the thing about food is you consume it, so you can always go back and shop more without trying to find room on the shelf. But thank you for being here.
Talking about the choices that we made collectively when we sort of had our final meeting, because we both come from very different perspectives in lots of ways, but we share a lot of interest, obviously, with food and craftsmanship. And so it was really kind of fun to really sort of parse through each piece and really talk about what draws us to it, why we think it should be included, and sort of force us to really like define this idea of scrumptiousness, like in jewelry. What does that sort of mean? So I thought it was really fun.
I did too, and actually, I was not geared towards food so much. To me, it was about the senses, which is not only about food. So that was what really drew me in. And then because it got more involved in food, but much of the work here has nothing to do with food. It's just enticing our senses and getting us to pay attention and to feel something.
Yeah, and one of the things we talked about was, you know, what does scrumptious mean? Like this like idea of like food and flavor when it comes to like jewelry and adornment. And one of the things that we had talked about was like, you know, like I was saying, this similarity between desserts and jewelry. I've been really like ruminating on that a lot recently because I think it's, you know, they're so similar because like, you know, to be a human, right, like we have to eat, we have to sleep, we have to, you know, be indoors most of the time, right? But in a lot of ways, I think jewelry and dessert are seen as like extravagant or extra, but as I thought about it, I think actually like these two things are like what make us human. It's like what makes life worth living, you know? Like just sustenance is one thing, but the exploration of form, materiality, you know, the joy that you get, the excitement, you know, it's frivolous, sure, but like that's like what culture is in the end, you know? And so I think it makes a lot of sense, like this idea of like with my background sort of coming here on this panel, because, you know, these are things that, you know, metals, just like with grains, you can just have bread if you want, but if you have a croissant instead, like why would you just have baguette, you know? So, you know, so that's why I sort of came from with that.
Well, the other thing is I don't know how people went through COVID, but I was in quarantine and I cooked, and as I cooked and made food, it was about making jewelry. I was making applesauce every single day just about because I used a miel, and it was like the process of making jewelry. I do a lot of sushi and I do fancy sushi, so it sort of has the similarity of process and reward for me. And then I look at it and well, I get to the experience of devouring it. It just gives you a place. There's a lot of similarities of process. And for me, COVID just put it over the top. And a lot of you, I'm sure many of my friends became bread bakers and dessert makers, particularly because the process of that is a time-consuming process. And what we do, even if it's not physically time-consuming, it's the creative process, which is time-consuming. And there's a lot of intuitiveness to it. I don't follow recipes. I read the recipe. Too many ingredients. Let me see how I can edit it down. And that's exactly what I do in my jewelry practice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah.
Can I ask a question just about like your process in terms of jurying. I think there are some students here that maybe have never applied to a juried show, or maybe don't really understand what that means. So can you just talk about how you interacted as jurors and whether or not you were making individual decisions and then coming together, or you were duking it out the whole time, or I'm curious.
Go first.
Well, one thing I want to say, and we actually said this, and I applied to and have images that are being sent out for invitationals, for shows, for press, whatever, and I have a professional photographer who takes my photos. I'm very fortunate, but we juried this from images, and I was saying, oh my gosh, I didn't see this in the image. I've been doing this for 30 years. I have juried other shows, but I don't always get to see the show after I've juried it. So to see this was great because I saw details here that we didn't get to see within the image. You can, no matter how good the lighting is. And most of the images were really good. There were a couple of images that didn't get to the work. You can't get an emotional part to the work no matter how much you try. But as a student, I will tell you, lighting and getting your work photographed is really important. Not only for shows, but you want to document your work. You want to document it for yourself so you can reference it yourself and see where you were and where you're going or where you're going to go. And if you're going to apply for anything, that's what's going to get you in, because people are not seeing the work. They don't get to touch it. They don't get that emotional connection. You get an emotional connection from an image, but it's not the same emotional connection that you're going to get from feeling the work. So now you can continue about us.
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, and on then too, the idea of the, sort of furthering the open calls and this sort of structure, photography is like one of the most important things. I know it's like, it seems like a sort of a task to like have to then document what you just finished, but it's sort of like in food, we always joke that if you want to cook professionally, you have to be able to clean professionally too, It's the same with like being an artist, is if you want to have a studio practice, you also have to like have a good like office admin structure. Like keeping, like you're saying, definitely document stuff, try and write down titles when you can, put dimensions down, keep track of what you're doing, because as the years go on, you don't remember a lot of the stuff. And it's good to have stuff to like reference, I think, And then also we live in a digital world, and so photography and image making is like one of the most important ways that generally you can like, interact with artwork. It's, you can go down a deep hole with it, but the idea of like Van Gogh, let's say, right? Like we all know Starry Night, but how many, of course it's here in town, but how many of us have actually seen it in person, right? So the photography of an object, of an artwork, oftentimes has a much larger life than the object itself. And so it's really important to like have that sort of honed in, But then I guess, the process itself. So what we did was we individually, all three of us had like sort of a table, and we scored everything individually, and then it got sorted by the collective score. And then the top half, it probably was, or top third. Oh, go ahead.
I can give you the technical.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, exactly.
So I sent them each a score sheet, and they did the jury on their own. We had like a range, 1 to 7 or something. And then we did the totals, and then we put them in order from like the top down to just kind of look at them. And then we talked about, but we ended up going through everything, because there were ones where, maybe somebody scored really high and somebody didn't. And so we talked about that to see if we wanted to move things around. And so that was really the process. And so that organization and the initial scoring is really that first step to get the conversation started, I think.
When our score was so different apart,
Yeah.
we actually discussed the piece, and we told them each other what we saw in the piece and educated each other about it. So, there was a couple of pieces in here that I personally missed, and we came together on them. And now that I see them in person, I'm glad they're here, and I now see what I missed in them, because it was a photograph, and because in some cases the description didn't have this tiny little detail. And so when you do details, it is really important.
Yeah, definitely. And that was the fun thing too, was, especially considering your like formal jewelry background and my sort of like fine art background, discussing these things that we had kind of really disparate scores on was really, I learned a lot as well. I think it was like a mutual exchange, you know?
No, it was.
Yeah.
And we had never met, and our backgrounds are so different.
Yeah, no, I thought it was really exciting too, because then I get to learn about the pieces and like the ideas behind it. You know, I understand technique, but I don't have the eye that a professional would in the industry, you know, and so even just walking around the gallery now, people always telling me about, oh, this is that and this is that, and it's just fun for me to learn these things and explore it, you know.
And function wasn't part of it, but that was really good for us to discuss, because that's where he was limited, you know. So.
It's okay.
No, it was
I don't know everything.
Not only that, I got a couple of recipes out of it.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Right. Exactly. Yeah. We like talk about food a lot. Actually, we talked about the farmers market for the first like 30 minutes today. So yeah, food is everything.
Especially if you're in New York.
Yeah.
It's all about
Yeah.
food.
Shop at the farmers market. Always.
Sorry. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, like, when I think of New York, I think of food as being like very much a part of the experience. And you guys were talking a little bit about dessert and like the farmers market and how you cook. But I guess as New Yorkers, like, how are you thinking? How do you feel about this work and its like relationship to being in New York and food?
It's a fascinating question.
That's
I don't know if I'm a New Yorker.
I didn't think, I mean, I
Yes.
am a New Yorker. I was
Yeah.
born in Brooklyn. But I didn't look at it in that way.
Okay.
Because initially, the word scrumptious wasn't, oh my God, this is all about food, where you looked at it about food. So it didn't relate to that. I mean, and there's a couple of pieces that are literal here, so then food became part of it. But, you know, I mean, I know the New York, well, it's actually a Philadelphia soft pretzel. There it is, you know, okay? So, I mean, some were literal and you would think about that, but for me, the food aspect wasn't as prominent as the fact that I wanted to be teased. I wanted my senses. I mean, some of them are not necessarily in this show that got accepted into the show, but it could have been referenced. There was one piece that didn't get into the show. The story, I was like, this is my story, because it was made from something that I eat and I save. And I have these things, peels or skins, all over thinking, what am I going to do with them? And somebody did something with it. So that particularly resonated with me, but for me, the food aspect of it was secondary.
Yeah. Well, and I've lived here for 8 years, so I don't know if I'm like officially a New Yorker yet.
No,
One of
you're
those.
not.
Yeah, exactly. I am well aware of that. But then I come from Chicago, so I am used to like city living, right?
And not only that, you've got a great food city.
Oh yeah, Chicago's good, and not as good as New York, but it's a good food city. Don't tell Chicagoans I said that. Well, I think too, it's like to that end, it's like, you know, in a city like this, in a place like this, like kind of everything is here, right? It's like it's always nonstop, all the time, in your face, always screaming at you, smell it. You know what I mean? And I think that you know, you have to kind of be quick on your feet. And so I think in a process like this, with so many works like that, can inform that, because it's like, oh, okay, no, this goes, this doesn't, this goes, this doesn't. You know, it just sort of, you have to be fast, you have to work hard to make it. So I don't know if that answered the question or not, but yeah.
How many pieces were submitted for this exhibition?
How many pieces?
How many pieces were submitted?
You told
Gosh,
us.
well, I think a couple people didn't want to be online, but we have 135 pieces online, so that's close.
So every piece that was in the jury selection is online?
Is in the online show.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Question.
When you think about food and the culture and all that, it's so sensory related. There's smell, there's color, like just the feeling of it. But then when you apply for the show, it's requiring you to like talk about explaining your work. It's kind of like giving you the process of, or like recipe almost. Like how was like reading about the writings about the work played in your jurying process?
Yeah, I did actually a blind read first, then I went through and read everyone's like information afterwards, because it comes from maybe the art background sort of thing. Like I come from like a very like staunch old school where the work needs to speak for itself, and then having then the text really helps in that way where it is like a recipe. But for me, actually, it can then, if it's too disparate, that can almost be like a drawback in a way, you know what I mean? And so wording and talking, it's one of these things, it's like, requiring artists to write about their work is such like a kind of a terrible thing, because it's like we already made the piece, like what do you even have to talk about it now too, right? But it's like trying to like hone that and figure that out and really kind of get to that place then, and then seeing the inspiration I thought was really cool. It's like, oh wow, I can see that, and really sort of elaborated, I think, and honestly too, with the work when I was judging it, I kind of was like, do I want to eat this? Yes, that side of it. It's like I want like truly scrumptiousness, you know what I mean? Because they're just, some of these things are so like palatable and just like, I don't know, it's all food.
Well, for me, the text was secondary, and when I looked at it, I didn't think about eating it, I just thought, I want my body to like have a rush. That's what I was looking for, and my work is abstracts of my connection and my storytelling, so in that sense, I can look at the abstractness of it because that's how I process.
Look here. Harriet, who's here, was so generous and prepared some questions. Let's see. We talked about a lot of these. I don't know if we talked about if we want to talk about any specific pieces or not. So you can say no to some of these questions, but like, kind of talking about things that surprised you in person. We touched on that lately. I don't know if you want to dive deeper into that or.
Yeah. I mean, a big thing for me is scale, which is so funny because like the dimensions are there. You know what I mean? But it just always in the end with jewelry, some pieces seem so much bigger, some seem so much smaller, and so then seeing them in person. Like most of them were along the same lines, I would say, but there were a couple where I was like, oh, okay, this is much more demure, or this is much more of a statement than I was expecting, and that was really cool.
Even though you give the dimensions, sometimes you see a piece, and in the photograph, it's so strong, and then you look at the sizes and you know that it's smaller and it's more intimate. And as a jeweler, that intimacy is really part of our experience. So for me, that was fun, was really good. But I do want to say, we juried the show. I had a list, I had the image, and I could not picture the selection being cohesive. So I want to thank Brianne because she did an amazing job putting this together. I don't know how you feel about it, but I think the cohesiveness and the connection between the pieces is really fluid. And I had no idea. Afterwards I knew there was good work in here, but I couldn't see how it fit together. And I also knew the scale, because there's a lot of small work in here. So I'm really pleased with the installation and the storytelling that happens, and there were a couple of pieces that there was one or two pieces I particularly said, I can't really tell, but I want to take a risk on this piece. It's either going to flop or it's going to be really good. And I'm really glad I did that because it succeeded. So sometimes when you apply to something and you think you're a little bit off, apply anyway. You have nothing to lose, even if you do pay to apply, and sometimes it's a little bit more money than you want to spend, but go for it. Take the risk.
Yeah, it's something that I learned early in my career is people that feel like they don't belong in community are often the most important people in that community. So, like if you think you're on the edge of, something you want to apply and you're not sure, then you should absolutely do that because you're probably going to be a person that people want to see in that show, So always have faith in yourself and your practice.
Special thanks actually to our exhibition.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to.
Hell yeah.
And Amelia and I made the finals,
Yeah.
We're very excited.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah, I was just about to touch on the idea of this. It's been a very collaborative process because we have an exhibitions planning committee. They had come up with a theme, right? And the jurors, so then we have the jurors come, and then the jurors, after we finished and had the final selection, threw out a couple ideas for the display that then we took back to the exhibitions committee, and then they took that to then kind of come up with the idea of the vinyls and different things, and then ultimately I put it together. But I loved all those like back and forth collaborative processes.
All hands on deck.
Yeah,
All
there's a
hands on
question
deck.
Here. There's a question here, and then Pat.
Great.
Hi, I'm Amy and I'm a student. I'm just curious, like I understand the ranking process you did for the selection. I'm curious where you decided like the cutoff. Was there a clear gap or was there a certain number of pieces?
Yeah, I mean, we usually fit, I think we ended up with 41. I usually say like between 35 and 40.
Yeah.
So then we look at the numbers, like, I don't know, if we had, I think it was 1 to 7. So like if you got a perfect score would be a 14. And so all the 14s, and then once you get down into 10, maybe 11s, we had too many. So that's where we start really going through and having those conversations.
But also we knew we had some small pieces, so we had a little leeway. If they were all large pieces, we would have been more limited, but we knew that they were smaller, we could do this.
I just want to say, I loved, like, back to this collaboration, like, that's what we were talking about, and all these tiny pieces, and Edward, you're talking about, like, it's like a tray with all the little desserts, the miniature desserts, and so we'll just put them out on trays, right? And that was kind of the inspiration for this, like
bonbons.
yeah. I hope it should it
Oh,
get
absolutely.
made.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was what I was talking about with the display. I was like, oh, well, it should just be like a pastry shop is like the idea, right? Like a glass case, and because everything is so just like a bonbon, like chocolate. It's like one little
Delicious.
bite, but it has so much impact and so much depth to it, right? Just like a lot of these pieces, and so I think it really is a great correlation, and I think it looks wonderful. I love like just like the light difference in the white. I think it's like a really really smart, very very good. And then even having the vinyls on the table as well, I think it makes it very cohesive, and it's a very very beautiful show. Well done, guys.
Teamwork.
Yeah, hell yeah.
It's the dream work.
Pat, you have a question?
Actually, I mean, it's kind of a comment, but maybe you can elaborate. I find it really fascinating. This is kind of to the exhibitions committee and the theme that even looking at all of the work in all of these other exhibitions in this gallery, this theme of Scrumptious kind of runs through, right? We see other food things and we see other, and so I think it's like, was that, you didn't know what work was going to be here, right? But it seems very relevant that it's not just this exhibition, right? There's something running through.
When we started talking in the committee about like, oh, New York Jewelry Week's coming up, like what's the show gonna be about? Like I always just think of coming here and eating. And then with this kind of talking about, I feel like the idea of coveting and not like a jewelry object, like, I have that feeling when I see them sometimes that I want to ingest them in a similar way to a bonbon, and so I think that was kind of how it started. So I feel like,
It's a
you
trend.
know, when you said like there's a piece of jewelry and you just like,
Yeah.
you feel it in the same way you feel like,
Yeah, I do a lot of like trompe-l'oeil sculpture, so like porcelain Doritos, things like that. So I'm at the point where like everything is food, So definitely it all makes sense together. Yeah.
As someone who's like maybe newly exposed to art jewelry, how do you feel, or do we convert you to the?
Oh, 10 out of 10, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, I think so much. I was talking about at the opening too. I think that there is so much exploration that happens in jewelry that like you don't see in like, let's say like the fine art world, like capital F, capital A, like Chelsea kind of galleries, because it's so technique forward. There's so much history. There's so much personality. Each maker or artist really decides what they want to hold value in, and that really ranges. And some of it is just like pure ornamentation, and some of it's like pure concept or anything in between. And that's a lot more in the art world, right? The fine art world. The idea of ornamentation and decoration is like a black spot almost. You have to be really careful with it, And here it's like, who the cares kind of thing. Just like do whatever you want. And I also too, as someone that's like very technique forward in an industry that's not always very technique forward in the fine art world, it's really nice to be here and see people like making good objects, like objects that will last, things that can even become heirlooms, But no, absolutely convert, 10 out of 10, yeah.
Well accomplished.
Yeah. Well, I've done some work. I had a collaboration with Matthew Lambert.
Okay.
Oh man, like 10 years ago now. Yikes. Maybe like 8 years ago. And so I had sort of dipped my toes into it a little bit, and then also given my background, I went to SAIC in Chicago, but I'm from Indiana. I lived in Louisville, Kentucky. I exposed to lots of like craft And so I've always had a soft spot in my heart for people that are sort of from that industry and sort of pushing the boundaries of that, whatever it may mean, you know. And so then working with Maddie, I was like, oh, this is like this is what's up, you know what I mean? And yeah, it's very alive, I think, in a way that other places might be a little bit sort of behind, you know.
Yeah, so obviously it'll change with whatever show you're on the jury for, but how much are you considering like wearability when you're looking at certain pieces? Like this is very conceptual. I think you guys are talking a lot about how like you kind of just have this feeling about the pieces. Like, are you considering wearability, or is it more just like you're looking at the piece and you're making like your immediate response to it?
I
Can you
mean,
repeat the question, because we
oh,
couldn't-
so
It's about wearability.
Yeah,
It's
is-
about wearability,
Okay.
and if we consider that in jury.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, anything can be wearable, right? Anything can be jewelry. And so I think for me, it didn't really cross my mind. It's like, once again, in art, if someone defines it as art, then it is. It doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad, but then it exists as that as an object. And so if someone presents it to me as jewelry, then I accept that. It's, you know, even if it's like 50-pound necklace, it's still jewelry, you know? So at least for me, it didn't really influence much my decision.
Okay, here's a jeweler's point of view. In jurying this, I didn't consider the wearability of it, okay? And I am very object-based. But to me, if it's jewelry, it could be wearable. The scale is open-ended. Those of us who make jewelry that is wearable, we know there is a weight issue. But there really isn't a size issue when I'm making jewelry. For me personally, curating this, it never entered it.
Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, the piece behind us, for example, which is like actually food, you know, that might be one where it's like, is this like truly wearable? Or maybe we should say it's like, you could wear it once, right, but sort of this like long, would that last like 20 years? Like that wasn't really part of the conversation. We were like, do we like this work? Do we respond to it? Like how do each of us individually think it fits the theme? And we sort of negotiated or agreed from there.
We consider durability or wearability. We were looking at it at the moment, what it did to us. That was what it was about.
Mhm.
It's about our experience and what it emotionally connected to one of our senses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think so, and even in our conversations, that's what it was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know,
Absolutely.
not all of this is jewelry in the show, but it fit the theme.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Question.
Another question?
Anyone else?
I could take that too.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if you want to add anything to this, but you know, one of our objectives with the shows is to show the diversity of the SNAG membership in all different ways, right? And so we have very established artists and students and the whole range of people from all around, even internationally. And I think it really makes a rich showing. And you don't have to add anything to that, but you're welcome to if you'd like.
I think the diversity is really nice. There are many people. Brianne knew so many more names and artists than I did, you know, so she would be able to say this is their language, because some of it could have been confusing. We would ask questions about not the work but the artist, and you would, in many cases, at least know who they were. The application was a diverse group, and I think that brought a better language, a better viewing for her, and also technique-wise. Techniques were open-ended. So some of this is more temporal, I think, but it doesn't really matter. I think one thing which is hard to always tell in an image, I think the craftsmanship in all the work here is the highest form. And I think that as jewelers, and a piece doesn't always look like it's meticulously made, but it's coming from a place that is meticulously and structural, so that it won't fall apart. It may disintegrate because the material will disintegrate, but because of craftsmanship, that won't happen. And I think every piece here has that structure that holds it up to the standards of SNAG.
It's great. Nothing to add.
I did think Harriet had a question that we hadn't touched on, and now I have to find it. It was about display. Let's see.
Harry,
I'm not quite, but it was, yeah. Well, there's this question here. Does laying a piece of jewelry directly on the table actually diminish perceived value? Should the artist take responsibility for creating a display of their jewelry? You know, how, I don't know, I don't know.
Well, I don't think it matters. I think it's about the work, and if the work is part of a storytelling, for me that's fine. No matter what the theme is, you know, there's an extension. Here's your piece, right? It works totally because you're telling a story, and part of that story is made by you. So for me personally, and for the jurying of the show, it didn't put it in either direction. The work was juried on its merit, not by the assortment or the storytelling. And I think here, I don't think anybody, well, I guess maybe this show, this exhibit, this display was sent by the artist to be displayed that way. Otherwise, I think everybody else here left it up to.
But no, there's a couple.
Oh, there are.
I can say I appreciate
talk
it.
about that then?
Well, I appreciate that. There's a couple like the ring map that have their own. Like there's a brooch here, and it's at a certain angle so that you can see the back of it. So I think it can be really helpful when that display is there. But I also would say, with that, to keep it in mind, like what displaying your work with a specific display might entail for the people that are installing it. You know, is this going to make it easier, or is this going to make it more complicated? So I think.
But it didn't make a difference in the jury.
No.
Well,
I think it was more talking about now with the.
Well, I think though that sometimes though in the jury and in the imagery, if they sort of go, I don't want to say too far, but if it's much more about like, how is it displayed in this picture, you know, that can take away, because then if I'm looking at a full bust of someone and it's a piece that's this big, it's like, okay, but brass tacks, like, it's this much of the image, you know what I mean? So, but I don't really think we even discussed like quality of image or how it was displayed when it came to the actual jurying process. It was sort of negligible to us. It was just, we can visualize what it was. There were some things we were like, it could be more detailed.
There were two pieces, I think, that the imagery was really confusing. And so I think one thing, we went back to the artist to talk to them about the slide. We liked the work, but the slide didn't really merit what we think the work was. We thought there was one in there. But the other thing is there's one piece in particular here that is beautiful, and we selected it, but it's shining more than we could tell from the image. So some of your work just can't be photographed. You know, you can use mirrors, you can use lights, but sometimes jewelry is so intimate, and there's so much happening, these little nuances, that the camera just loses it. You can get that, and then you lose the other part. So a professional photographer who is not a jewelry maker, right, doesn't quite know the language. You should be on site whenever that happens, because you can give the photographer a guide, but it's sometimes you have to make a compromise. What do you go for?
Yeah, and also too, if you're doing your own photography, like lighting is one of the most important things you can learn and explore and like utilize in your practice, because that really will influence the quality of the image they end up like submitting. So, and you can Google stuff and find things online, but you can sort of play around with it. But lighting, if it's your own studio, that's like what you want to focus on when it comes to documentation.
Go on.
So, when pieces aren't as strong, like photographically, do you then go to the writing, or is it more like at that point you would reach out to the artist? Or do you use the writing to supplement whether or not, you know, photos are good or representative of the art?
I think, yeah, so, Yeah, well, so do you, if the image isn't of the highest quality, do we then sort of defer to the text and to help like sort of buttress like what we're looking at, you know? You're welcome. I think for me it was more about materiality. Like if the image was in the highest quality, I'd be, okay, well, what is it made of? And I would go look at like the description in that regard, you know? But I don't know, the low quality images like honestly didn't like bother me personally because it's just like, well, you know, some images are just kind of JPEG'd out sort of thing, you know? But it's like, but in the end though, it's like, it's good to have good quality images, you know?
Well, it's like not necessarily the quality of, like you have a good quality image, but I think the other might have been saying that like sometimes the piece doesn't translate that well.
I definitely went to the text.
Yeah, there you go.
And we discussed that.
Yeah.
If there was something that was a little confusing, that's where our conversation was really warranted. We were able to teach each other because we came from such a different background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say as an observer, right? It was then those conversations that we're discussing to understand more, because I think when you're looking at the photos, you're, like you said, like you're trying to understand what you're looking at.
Yeah, yeah.
So a really good photo maybe will help that, or some text might help that, but that's what you're trying to get to, is that level of understanding, and then sometimes it becomes a conversation to understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
And in this case, the pool was great. It was hard for us to make a selection.
Yeah.
Everyone who applied was really thoughtful work. And this was not such a large pool to jury, because a lot of times there's like 200, 300, 400 artists applying for something, and everybody has more than one image. So this was actually not a long process in the sense of they start to meld together.
Yeah.
It was the right amount. I mean, maybe there could have been more. I highly recommend and suggest, please do apply to all call-outs, but it wasn't taxing, and sometimes it's just too many.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been on a panel before for a residency program where I think we had over 600 submissions. And so in that sort of instance, you have to kind of go through on your own and really kind of decide where you're coming from, because with that many people, you come to the table with 5 jurors, you all might have very different top people, you know what I mean? So, but no, this honestly was very, well, and we have a good rapport too. I thought we like talked a lot about where we were coming from in a really good way.
A lot about food.
Yeah, we talked a lot about food. Yeah, we both like to talk as well.
You know, you have a fabulous meal, you're enjoying it, and you're already talking about the next meal.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, New York is like, you know, whether it's street food or restaurant food or home cooking, you know, or buying ingredients, you know, everybody's putting their 2 cents in and everybody's got something planned.
Yeah.
So it was great for me. I'm already asking him for recipes.
That's
you
true.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Questions? Oh.
Yes.
Okay, I guess this is kind of a wild one. If you two were to make a meal together, what would you make?
Oh, I guess challah. We just talked about
I already
challah.
asked him for a recipe for a buckwheat challah.
Yeah.
Which, but that would be interesting because
question.
I don't eat any dairy and I don't eat any meat. And
I love dairy and meat.
Right. And I stay away from, if I can, I stay away from white flour and sugar. So
I do not stay away from those things.
here I eat, and food is really important, but I do have a limited range. So, you know, but it's interesting. Somebody just asked me about something, and I described it by the marbleization of fat in meat. They asked me about something. I was trying to describe what I saw. I haven't had a piece of meat in over 40 years, so it's still there, and I like the smell of it, but I don't eat it.
That's fair. I actually was a vegetarian for about 13 years, and I've come back to eating meat, sort of thing, you know, yeah, in my like adult life. I think too, both of us are really avid home cooks, and so I would imagine it would be like a home cooked meal, you know. I mean, I grew up in Indiana in sort of very wholesome family. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She canned, she gardened, home cooked meal every night. We ate out maybe 3 times before I went to college, you know. So it's like, yeah, it's very weird. It's not how people grow up anymore, you know. But I love like the idea of like home cooking because it's so different than restaurant cuisine, like, and it should be, right? Like the best thing you're ever going to eat is something that you were served in a home. It's like not going to be at a restaurant. And the best compliment you can give someone is that the food reminds them of something their grandmother made or that their mother made. You know what I mean? That's very well. I mean, my grandmother made horrible brownies, but they're still like my favorite brownies. They were so dry and cakey, but I loved them.
Well, that's the thing. It's memories. It's the stories, and those, as jewelers, that's what we're looking for. You know, so those memories bring us to the present, and then we use that present to use our voice and vocabulary for what we're making now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Do you guys consider like the diversity of like the pieces, like when you're looking through, like say you like all necklaces or something, do you then go back and decide to like
We did that.
Oh, we did? Yeah. Do you want to speak to it? I don't know. We're doing
I don't
it.
remember.
We did it, yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah, because I take like the top, then I put them in that score thing so you can look at them, and
Oh,
then
that's right. Yeah.
I think we,
Yeah,
yeah,
you talked
I
about-
typically
Well, I
kind of
think
do
we- I think
that.
it was good.
Sometimes it happens naturally.
Yeah, we had a good level, I think, already.
Yeah, this one might have had a natural balance.
Yeah.
that-
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think we, I mean, we knew, I think the only thing was size. We talked about how many small pieces there were gonna be. And we wanted the impact. And we were concerned about that. But the impact is here with a lot of small pieces. Those of us who do contemporary studio jewelry, size is there, you know, we're working big. So that was the thing that we talked about that.
Yeah.
The size more than too many rings or too many pendants or brooches. For me, that wasn't an issue at all.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was the impact that you'd come in and something would just make you have a rush.
And the majority of the pieces that were in the top two, like we agreed on. I think there were actually very few. Like,
Very few.
and even among the three of us, it was like, oh yeah, 10 absolutely going to be in there. Like not even, you know.
Right.
And so we really came from, I think, a very similar place.
I think there were maybe 5 pieces that we taught each other about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where most of the time we were like pretty close, and then we each had a couple of pieces that we said, you know, what do you think? You know,
Yeah.
so we had a conversation maybe about a handful of them.
Well, and I think too, with those ones that we weren't sure about, we sort of decided that we wanted to be more exploratory. We wanted to really kind of cast a wider net for things that might be more untraditional. Like we wanted to allow those pieces into this sort of exhibit.
Yes.
But I think too, to answer your question, so maybe not bringing in, but when we said we have too many pieces, right? We have to remove some. Then maybe that was some of that consideration of, well, we already have a lot of brooches, so let's take this ring instead of this brooch. I think maybe.
Well, I know we did also consider too if someone was like really, really, really established, and that notion of like, well, this person has been showing for 20 years, you know what I mean?
Or there were some people that maybe had been in like the last 3 snag
Yeah, exactly.
exhibitions, and we said, let's bring somebody new in.
Yeah, bring in
some
new
of that,
blood, new
yeah.
technique. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we went a couple of artists above the original amount, but we then said, but you know what, we can do that, let's do it, you know, because some of them are smaller, we'll be able to do that. So, yeah, we did.
Exactly.
Yeah.
More than make it work, it was a success, I would say. So there you go.
Any other questions? Well, I want to thank Edward and Biba. This has been a great conversation. Thank you for joining the beautiful show.
I want to thank all the artists that did apply to the show, and for everybody coming here, and for everybody who supports SNAG. Okay, it's the only organization we have of this, and I want to put a shout out to Jim Cotter here, because he's one of the reasons SNAG is here. Stand up, Jim.
Yeah, that's what I think.
If you're in the show, could you raise your hand?
Oh, hell yeah.
Oh, wow.
Congratulations, guys. Yeah, well done. Well done.
Yeah, if you're in the show, we'll take a photo of you with your piece after, and a group. Oh yeah, that's on my shot list. A group photo of all the
there you go.
artists in the show.
Great.
Great. And
Yes, thank
also,
you.
so we've got cards here if you want to see more of the work online and you want to purchase any of these pieces, you can do that through our online exhibition. And we've got some Metalsmith magazines and other information about upcoming snag events and how to join. So thank you all for coming.
Wait, I want to.
Oh, one more
And
thing.
by the way, this show, not the entire one, but a selected group have a page in the current issue of
Oh, yes,
Metalsmith
we had a-
magazine. So if you're not a subscriber, it's a good thing to be a subscriber, but otherwise, take a peek. They did a beautiful layout.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Okay.
And they said, so you said, do you want to talk about this for a minute? About the
Oh, okay,
selection?
so we selected the pieces that were gonna be in the layout. We had nothing to do with the layout, but we selected them, and that was a hard thing actually to do.
Well, and honestly, the selection for the magazine too, just given like what magazines are in print, like we really had to side with images that were of a high quality, like a large image, you know? And then from there we had, I think a sort of larger amount, we sort of honed it down because we were trying to make sure that everything was represented and, you know.
Yeah, because we kind of had this layout that we knew we were working with, so we knew we needed to find what is the piece that's going to work
Right,
in
we
this
knew there
spot.
would be one big piece.
And then, you know, balancing kind of white background. So this is right where it got into a little bit more of the technical
Yeah.
quality of the photograph.
Yeah.